everyone. Welcome to Community Connection, your window to the world around you. My guest today is Charity Loring, and she is a licensed clinical mental health therapist and social worker from Loring Therapy. Their motto is empowering others to empower themselves. What a strong motto and a wonderful platform to work on. Charity, welcome.
Thank you
To Community Connection. It's such a pleasure to have you. Charity, I know you and I had a conversation on the phone, and we were talking about families and struggles and things that people just have to deal with, especially right now during the holidays, during the winter months. That's my most difficult time.
Okay.
I don't like winter. I don't like the cold. But what really caught my attention in regards to what you do is that you have these different groups for individuals that are having challenges in their life, and they're different titles for these different groups. And again, what caught my attention is it's something that you do to really help out the community, and I thought that was phenomenal.
Thank you.
Talk to us a little bit about the logistics of the groups, and then we're gonna talk about each group. So tell us about the groups and how they were formed.
Well, they were formed actually by me. I led free therapeutic support groups for the community for several years, and then I decided to take on interns as well from local universities who I could train to also help lead these groups for the community, so we could either keep them free or at least at a very low cost for the community. And so now the way that our groups run is I take on new interns every academic year. I train them for 3 months while I lead the groups, and they observe, and then we do supervision. But after that, they are then fully trained to lead the groups themselves, and I just pop in once in a while to make sure everything's going well.
Wonderful. Well, the groups are set up where they're free for the first 60 days, and then they're $25 for the whole year, unlimited access to these groups. So for our audience, and we're talking about groups, so let's clarify what they are. You have different groups that you have that meet periodically. Women's groups, social anxiety group, and a few other ones. The women's group. What is that about? Who would attend that group, and what would they learn, and how would they be empowered?
Oh, good questions. Well,
and I started with the women's group.
Women's
That's
group.
the most important one you got going.
Well, good. Yeah, the women's group, it's for any woman from ages 17 on up. And it's an open forum where women get to discuss any of their issues.
What are the most pressing issues that you've seen during these groups?
I would say depression, anxiety, marital problems, and family problems.
Do you find that the women are open to talk about these, or are they really?
Well, in the beginning, and this is the case for any of our groups, which is perfectly understandable, whenever somebody comes for the first time, they're a little nervous because they're going to be sharing some pretty vulnerable information with people they don't know. Sure. But once they see that we're all there to support each other, that there's a professional in charge, and that there's therapeutic advice involved, then they warm up, and then they're very open.
So if somebody came in, let's say a woman who is being abused, domestic violence at home, and I know there's a lot of there's a lot of certain things involved in giving advice. I mean, I do mediation, and I did domestic mediation, and so I know there's a lot of areas that are different than mediating a normal situation, whether it's a fight or what have you. But domestic violence, there's a lot of stringent rules and regulations. So how do you approach that, and what would be the conversation in one of your groups?
Well, if somebody shared that they were being abused, basically the first thing we do is just check with safety. So, are you safe when you go home? And if not, then we share resources with that individual, safe shelters and things of that nature. So if they don't feel safe, they can utilize these other community resources. Now, when it comes to being a therapist, we're what's called a mandated reporter, but that's with children and adults, or I'm sorry, seniors, so vulnerable populations. So if it's a woman who is being abused, we can't report that because she is an adult. She is a,
Correct.
kind of like a consenting adult, so to speak. Not that there's really consent involved, of course, but we can't report that. So all we can do is give her therapeutic resources, as well as, just be there for her emotionally. Let her talk about what she needs to talk about, as well as share therapeutic techniques and strategies that might be helpful in her situation. And each situation is unique.
Do you talk about a plan? I know
a safety plan.
A safety plan,
Mm-hmm.
a plan, an exit plan.
Mm-hmm.
Do you go through those
Yeah.
steps?
Yeah, when it comes to that first part, when I mentioned safety, we need to just check and see where they're at. So if there is a need for a safety plan involved, which also includes an exit plan, we do go over that with the individual. And usually if it does seem like a very serious situation, she can share in group therapy, but then we usually keep that individual after individually, so we can talk with them and make sure that everything that we've talked about as far as an exit plan, a safety plan, that it can be helpful to them.
Can you share with us a specific, well, without names, but just in general, where you did come across someone that was being abused and sort of walk them through to their exit plan?
Sure. Well, gosh, there's quite a few to choose from, unfortunately. One that comes to mind, it started out as emotional and verbal abuse, and then it progressed to physical abuse. However, she was feeling a great deal of guilt because she would fight back too, and so she felt that she didn't have the right to leave or to have an exit plan because she was participating in the violence, whereas it was more so she was reacting to that violence.
Protecting herself, basically.
Protecting herself, exactly.
And so with that emotional abuse, that's probably why she felt guilty.
Emotional abuse, yes, that's the biggest part. Because with emotional abuse, it tends to isolate that individual, make them feel like nobody cares about them but this abuser, this other person. And also, a lot of times the abuser will try to keep them from their own friends and family and things of that nature. So they kind of feel alone in all of it. And that's another reason why the groups can be helpful, so they know that they're not alone in this. And, we can address it in that way. Now, as far as a safety plan, with this woman specifically, she was afraid to go home that night, and so we connected her with some local resources. First Step is an organization.
Absolutely, we've had them on the show before.
Good. Well, I use them as a resource quite often when it comes to cases like this. And so they were able to help out and give her a safe place to stay. And at first she wasn't willing because, again, she thought she was just as guilty as the other party. And we had discussed that, and she had realized, no, she really does have to protect herself. And she did end up going that evening. And, that was actually a very good outcome.
Absolutely. So she
and she
used her exit plan.
She used her exit plan immediately, which is great because sometimes women won't.
And how long was she going to this group and getting assistance before she realized she needed to make a change?
This was her first group, her very first group that she attended. And she, I guess, felt very welcomed by everybody and just decided to be very open, and that was her very first group.
And she just, that's amazing. That's great. That's
she reached out
really
for help.
Powerful.
Yeah.
So what other issues do women come in talking about in this women's group, other than the issue of domestic violence, of course?
Okay. Well, many. It can be family issues with their children or with relatives or in-laws. It could be...
Children will drive you to a therapy group.
Yes, they will. They can be a challenge, of course. We love them, but they're a challenge. Yes.
Speaking of children, I know a lot of children, and there's so many diagnosis of ADHD in the schools and adult ADHD. So how have you been addressing this, and do you have a specific group for adults with ADHD or children with ADHD?
Good question. Actually, in the beginning when I was leading the groups years ago, I did have both, But it wasn't neither one of them were very well attended, unfortunately, which is surprising to me, especially with the diagnosis being, rampant.
So prevalent.
Yes. So there wasn't really much.
Unless you had someone actually saying you have to go to your group and taking them there too, it's sort of
that's
the
another
nature
thing.
Of the beast.
Right, and that's another thing about our groups. They're not court mandated by any means. These are mostly people that just come because they want to come. And once in a while we'll have people who are court mandated, but it's pretty rare. So yeah, it's not mandated. And for whatever reason, they weren't well attended. But I am always willing to revisit that in the future.
So what tools would let's say an adult with ADHD, if they were to attend a group therapy, what tools would they walk out with?
Well, lots. We do many versions of therapy. So one is cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT for short. And starting at the very beginning in working with an adult, the first thing is practicing mindfulness, meaning being very aware of your present moment, because the mind gets distracted in the ADHD
Absolutely.
mind. So trying to be more present in each moment. We do stress reduction and breathing exercises to kind of get people back into their present moment. And then after that, we branch off of that with organizational skills and there's so many. There's actually 20 plus different things that we can teach to adults with ADHD. But the first part is to just get them in their present moment and make them more aware of their surroundings instead of distracted by their surroundings.
Do you feel that being in a group with other individuals that suffer from the same challenge, ADHD or ADD, does that empower them more, or is that more distracting to them?
Oh, good question. Well, each facilitator is thoroughly trained, myself as well as my interns, and the way that the groups are always run is we go around the group and people share whatever it is they feel they need to share in regards to that topic. And then once everybody's had their turn, then we have open discussion. And then at the end, we actually share therapeutic techniques. So it's actually very structured, which is good for the ADHD mind as well, is to have that structure. But the trained facilitator, it's their job to make sure everybody stays on track. So if people start to get distracted or whatever, we just gently guide them back so we can stay focused on the structure of the group.
Now it's group therapy, but if an individual has a challenge that is not being covered, do you take the time to maybe individually speak to this person afterwards?
Yes.
Or what's the process in that?
Yeah. If somebody seems like they need some very pressing help, sometimes we'll stick around and see if they're available. And also I do individual therapy as well as couples and family therapy. And so if it's somebody who I can take, then I will definitely be more than happy to take them on as an individual client as well, if that is something that they want.
I see. Anxiety, social issues, and especially what's going on internationally, when you hear about what's going on in the news, and there's a little bit of a fear factor there,
right.
In regards to the issues, the news items, and children are being exposed to this as well as adults,
right.
And how does that play into everything, and what are you seeing with that kind of thing? I mean, is there an issue with people, or is this something that's going to just sort of flow over kind of thing?
Well, it's one of those things where, especially with what's going on in our society today as far as more recent events, it really just depends on the individual. Some people, they lead a very fear-based life, and if that individual does, then something like that would really affect them deeply. Some people face different challenges and don't really base how they're going to react to life on fear, so it doesn't affect them as much. I would say that as a whole, as far as my clients go, I would say it mildly affects them, the things that are going on in our...
So what is the therapy for that? What would be your approach for someone that comes in saying, I'm really afraid, I don't want to go to the shopping mall,
Okay.
I don't want to do this, you know, I'm worried for my kids. What is your
Sure.
approach? Obviously, I mean, that's overdone, but still, I mean, that fear factor is there. And like you
Sure.
said, some people, you know, live a fear-based life, and
Sure.
this is definitely feeding into that fear.
Right, right, definitely. Well, each individual is different. I tailor it to each individual. So, for example, if somebody has pretty much lived in fear most of their lives, then first we try to get an understanding of where that came from, and then address it, and then decide how we want to reframe that in the mind, in the brain. So different ways of reframing could be something along the lines of, when I go into a public place, one client actually came up with this one. I thought it was creative. My odds are really good. I really liked that one. But instead of going into a place thinking I'm unsafe, everybody's out to get me, it could be something as simple as reframing it to a statement like that. But it takes practice. Practice with anything you're going to get better at, and therapy's included in that. So we reframe things, and then we actually do exposure therapy. So exposure therapy could be, if they have a fear of going into a public place, then I take them for a walk around the block if it's a nice day out, and we talk and try to have them find their comfort level with that. And if they're having problems, they voice them to me during that time. Or the exposure therapy could be done by themselves or with a spouse or a family member, where they could go into, let's say, a grocery store for just 5 minutes to get used to that, and then come out, and then maybe the next day progress to 10 minutes, and so on and so forth. So taking measurable
Those baby steps.
Yeah, exactly.
You led into going outdoors. So you actually have something called outdoor therapy, hiking. That sounds like a lot of fun.
Thank you.
So who would actually attend this, and what kind of help would they get from attending this?
Well,
other than it just sounds like fun.
Well, yeah, there's definitely the fun factor, and anybody can attend outdoor therapy. That is free when I am leading those hikes. So the mindset behind outdoor therapy is when we're out in nature, it has a calming effect on the nervous system. And on top of that,
that is true.
It really helps to practice more mindfulness, kind of like what I was discussing earlier with ADHD. You can use it for pretty much anything, but kind of being in the present moment. So I'll give people small exercises on the hike, like, try to pick out at least 4 birds that you saw, or any sort of detail that would mean something to you, just so you can continue to bring yourself back into the present. So if your mind is jumping to the future and worry, or jumping to the past and worry, let's see what we can do in the moment right now. And because nature has that calming effect, they work in conjunction with one another.
So it's sort of a relaxing therapy. So it's not really a focus group, more so than let's just go and have fun and just be with other like-minded people.
Yes, and anybody can attend that.
You have something called anger is not the bad guy. And sometimes it's okay to be angry,
right.
Just and validate emotions. So do you have a lot of angry people sitting around in this group? You do, okay.
Well, in the groups, sometimes. It's more so in my individual therapy, because one of my specialties is anger management. And with that article that I wrote, Anger is Not the Bad Guy, anger is just a natural human emotion that everybody has. It's what we do with that emotion, how we actually react to that anger, that can get us into trouble, or can make a situation even worse. So it's not about telling somebody they should never be angry, because that would be like telling them they shouldn't be human. They're having a natural human emotion.
Angry.
Yeah,
Sure.
Exactly. But it's, what are we going to do with that anger? How do we want to handle that anger in the future? So it can be possibly productive, or how can we calm yourself enough to address the situation, not in anger. So it's how we react to that anger is what that article was about.
So if somebody comes in and says, I'm angry at my family, I'm angry at my wife, I'm not happy with my work, I'm I'm angry at everything. Nothing's working out for me, and I don't know what to do with this. So what would your response or reaction be to that person? How would you start?
Well, first I would ask just a lot of questions, like, what are your triggers? What triggers you? And then I would have them go, if they're mad at everybody, I'd have them go down the list.
As to why?
What triggers you about mom? What triggers you about dad? What triggers you about so-and-so? And what I tend to pick up is a pattern of what their triggers are, because usually the trigger is pretty similar amongst all people. Well, I don't like it when they tell me I'm doing something wrong, let's say. And if that's the case for the majority of the people that anger them, then we work on, all right, so what is it that you feel like when somebody says that you might be doing something wrong or inappropriately? How does it make you feel? And then we continue on with some cognitive behavioral techniques and how he or she can handle that differently.
Do you find that helps? I mean, do you find that going through the process and going through that therapy, that once they're back into, you know, that lifestyle and the norm again, that they have those tools and they can change? Or
it's hard at first, because anything is
they
hard
say
at
you
first.
can't really change someone. So,
No.
So do they really change, you know, the way
Actually,
they approach things and how they look at things?
Absolutely they can. It's just a matter of how much work they want to put towards that. Because I'll be completely honest, therapy is not going to help anybody
Unless they want it.
Yes, exactly, unless they want that help and unless they're willing to do the work. So, for example, if, you know, going into the home with anger seems almost impossible to them, then we start with just one of their triggers. All right, who's somebody that does not trigger you as often? Let's start with them. Let's practice with that. Let's look at some techniques and some things that you can do to handle that situation. Then what ends up happening is they start to feel more confident, like, all right, I'm finally getting this. I'm actually able to do what I need to with this person. So then we can kind of graduate up to somebody else that they have a little more difficulty with. So we take it, again, baby steps, step by step by step. We don't try to address it as, all right, you're going to have to go home and be happy with everybody. That's just unrealistic.
You know, especially nowadays, we're sort of like the sandwich generation. We're trying to deal with our kids, and yet, you know, we're trying to deal with our parents too, with their issues, and a lot of us are, you know, sort of right in between there. So having to care for your aging parents, having to care for your family and kids, it does put a stress, and then a lot of guilt too, in regards to, am I giving my time enough here? Am I spreading my time enough here? And am I doing what I need to do?
Right.
So caring for loved ones is what you titled this. So what are the advice that you would give for someone that's trying to juggle that and trying to do what they can, you know, for both areas, without feeling the guilt and making sure that, you know, those two areas are being taken care of?
Sure, absolutely. I use the term dialing back a bit when it comes to that. So it's fine to help everybody you need to in your family, but you may have to dial it back a notch or two to take away a little bit of that stress, because if you actually take time for yourself here and there, I mean, it doesn't have to be all day or all week, but just long enough so you can start to feel relaxed and you have everything together again, then you're actually going to have more energy to give to others, no matter who it is. So when I mean dialing it back, it would mean, like, if you go to the nursing home 7 days a week, maybe dial it back to 5 days a week and start talking to other family members and building a support system, or friends, or looking into talking to the local social workers, see if they can help out, you know, finding resources. Or if it comes to kids, dialing it back, where if you're volunteering at their school 5 days a week, dial it back to 4 or 3 and find a little bit of time for yourself in between there, because it's not selfish, it's self-preservation. And the more we take care of ourselves, the more we actually have the energy to take care of other people. So that's what I would tell them.
Absolutely, that makes a lot of sense. So much talk about the GMOs and the health issues and what's in our food. And I watched a documentary just yesterday, and I think it was up to like 1:30, 2 o'clock watching this, and it was about all the products and the food that we're being fed without really knowing, you know, the aspartame and the different chemicals that are in there that are cancer causing, that are making us sick. You have something called How to Set Healthy Boundaries, and I'm sure that has something to do with you know, making sure you're eating right and exercise. So what kind of person would go to that particular group, How to Set Healthy Boundaries?
Well,
and that's a whole show in itself, the GMOs, that was
sure.
like unreal. Like, that kept
well,
me
yeah,
thinking.
There's so many things that do affect us, both physically and mentally. So it's good to consider all if we can, without overwhelming ourselves too much, but it is important to consider those things. In the How to Set Healthy Boundaries group, it's also called the Assertiveness group. Basically, there's 4 different personality styles. There's aggressive, somebody who's very outwardly forceful. There's passive, somebody who just kind of takes the back seat all the time and never really says anything, but kind of boils up on the inside.
And that shows up later on when you least expect it.
Yes, yes, yes. And then there's passive aggressive, which is somebody who says things in a very passive way, kind of like, for example, if somebody were to ask me for money, I could, in a passive aggressive way, I could say, oh, sure, I'll help you out with money. I just won't pay my bills next week. You know, things like that. And then there's assertive. And assertive is the healthiest of all of those. And assertive is being kind and compassionate while also being, you know, firm and direct with people that you care about.
I'll lend you the money, but I need it back in a month.
Yes, that's a good example.
Okay.
Perfect. Exactly. That's a good way to do it. So it's kind of like setting healthy boundaries in that way where you set it with others, but you can also set it with yourself as well. So, for example, if you're concerned about your diet, the types of processed foods you might eat, setting healthy boundaries internally so you can be a healthier person too. So it goes both ways, externally and internally.
We've got just a couple more minutes, but the holidays are coming up, and a lot of people get depressed during the holidays, especially those that are away from family, and so many other things we could talk an hour about. But what is your advice to people during the holidays to stay sort of focused and happy?
Sure. With the holidays, again, it depends on the person, but a lot of people, they do get depressed because they don't have that family anymore to spend that time with. Maybe some loved ones have passed. And in situations like that, I focus on their support system. And if they don't have one, how's a way that we could go about building one? Whether it's going to a local senior center or you know, just reconnecting with some old friends or family members, but building a support system so they don't feel so alone anymore. Because that's what a lot of people face when it comes to depression during the holidays.
And shopping too, and that just gets really overwhelming, and you almost feel like you have to do it now rather than having it something that's pleasant and what have you. So, well, there's a lot of different things we could discuss, and you know, these groups are amazing. I think there was a couple that depression and anxiety groups, social anxiety, women's groups, how to set healthy boundaries, outdoor therapy. So just something for everyone, and it doesn't have to be a major issue. It's just something if you want to go and you want to talk to people that are just dealing with things that you're dealing with, and have that camaraderie and have that group dynamic. So empowering them to empower themselves.
That's right.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Charity, tell us how people can actually find out about these groups and sign up for them if they would like to.
Oh, sure. There's a couple of different ways. There's my website, which is luringtherapy.com, and they can find all the groups there, or it's through a meetup site as well, where they can actually RSVP for the group on there. And the name that I gave to the groups is Emotional Support Collaborative. Okay. So either Googling that or just going directly to my website.
Which was your website again?
luringtherapy.com.
luringtherapy.com, and it's up on our screen. So thank you. Thank you so much for being
welcome.
here, and thank you for what you do for the community.
Thank you.
And these groups are amazing, free and then very affordable, $25 for the whole year for unlimited groups, just to go and talk and sort of take things off your mind if you have to.
Right.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us on Community Connection, and we will see you next time.